all of you. We've run way beyond the time allotted, and I'm sorry for that. But here it is. I think Air Marshal Chopra wanted to keep the best for the last, so here I am. I'll try my very best to run through it as much as I can. So this is the subject I was given. But really, I think what we are meaning to say is how to regulate the use of the technology. When we are talking in context to anything, actually, how you use it on Earth, how you're going to use it in space. So this becomes evident from the fact that the arrangement of the Outer Space Treaty, which is ex cathedra, 1967. Now, this is not an altruistic document by any measure. Eyeball to eyeball confrontation straight out of Second World War. They hate each other. And of course, we too has told them just how important, and they are military men, so they know it anyway. So you have this treaty where neither should be able to own outer space. Each should have the freedom to access it, to develop their technologies, which is to say military technologies. But not nuclear, because we have just gone through 1945 and everyone knows exactly what happened there in Japan. So you already had the Limited Test Ban Treaty. That is expressed in Article 4 of Outer Space Treaty. No nuclear weapons, but also added is WMDs, because there's long experience in war using chemical and biological and such like. So the two pillars is really peaceful purpose. So therefore, what is peaceful purpose? Let me tell you that the two sides chose to go to the newly established United Nations, not a bilateral treaty. Artemis Accords is a bilateral. So they go to the UN. Why? Because there is multilateral engagement. More and more countries have become now independent sovereign state, ours included, which were colonies, those that had been earlier colonies, and each has one vote equal to the other, no matter how powerful or no matter how not. So you go to the UN, the first 2 years are spent establishing the institutional mechanism, the Office of Outer Space Affairs, and the COPUS, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And what is peaceful use? Non-military. This whole Outer Space Treaty took 10 years before the accepted, negotiated settlement on every single word and point was made. So peaceful purpose means non-military purpose. As up to now, it has not been used for non-military purpose, outer space, space to space. When you're using a space service as a force multiplier for terrestrial warfare, it is not the use of space. It's not a space war, as some people are saying that there's going to be a space war, it is a space war. No, it's not. As yet, we fortunately do not have a space war. Well, who can tell of the future, though? So that is the first point. The second is the principle of non-appropriation. Neither sides, and of course they're the only two, can lay claims of sovereignty or in any other way, by use, by occupation, and most importantly, again directly connected to the Artemis, by any other means. So when you study the Artemis Accord, look at it in this dimension. Next, what is outer space? So it includes the moon and it includes the celestial bodies. And freedom to go and come back, operate, and so forth. After all, when Russia, USSR launched Sputnik, they didn't ask anybody. Few weeks later, the Atlas A, the first intercontinental ballistic missile, nobody asked America why they had done it. And so this is wrapped in a, call it a choga, if you like, of the UN Charter, which gives you Article 51, the right of self-defense, if you are attacked, when you are attacked, not before that. So when George Bush in 2005 and 6 made statements that we could deny access to those that are adversaries, and we will always support friends and allies and so on, then there was a huge debate about, does he mean preemption in outer space? Is that what he's contemplating? This was soon after the United States had demolished Saddam Hussein. So there was a certain sort of unsettled feeling, if you like. Now, of course, the UN Charter, you know, and international law. Why international law? How do I move this forward? So anyway, international law, peace, security, and all of that. Chair, you'll have to help me. Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I'm trying to do that. What? Yes, that's what I was doing. So then, of course, as I said, no nuclear weapons, no WMDs, and no, that is to say, in the orbit of the Earth, but no placement on or in the orbit of the moon and other celestial bodies. This is important. And then you have all these, I call them the do-it-yourself kits, if you like. All countries are, it's a common, interest of mankind. It is the common province of mankind, irrespective of economic non-discrimination. All that things that have value. I mean, those were the things that were negotiated by the new members of the UN. I don't think they understood the value, because in the last 70 years, even though it was not the objective of the Outer Space Treaty, this is what has happened. All our economies are dependent, each one of us is dependent on it. And now think about it. We like to shoot the messenger because that's the easiest thing to do. Oh, well, the treaties are too old. We need a consensus. Do we have consensus? Manoj has just spoken about geopolitics. Eyeball to eyeball confrontation. Now you have a third superpower that wishes to be the only global superpower. One of the two superpowers wants to be the only global superpower. So think about it. It is not a room like this, which is corpus, where somehow the room has vibes that don't allow you to agree. No, it's each one of us. It's our leaders. It's the advisors of the leaders and the advisors of the advisors of the leaders. They enabled the Outer Space Treaty and its accompanying treaties. It's not happening now. So what do we all need to do? If there's a catastrophic event up in outer space, we are the users are going to suffer. And I mean our economies, even if India is a spacefaring nation. So what does our leadership need to do? Do we need to raise our voice? Ask not belligerently, but say we need to discuss this. In the ITU, in every forum, do we need to think about what we need to do for ourselves, at least to make a point about it? So the Outer Space Treaty regulates only how a space object is going to be used. That means how the technology in that object will be used, and that will be for peaceful purpose. What about the other natural resources? The International Telecommunications Union is the international organization that manages and regulates the use of radio spectrum and of the orbits. And in this case, we are specifically referring to the geostationary orbit because it allots the orbital slot. As far as low Earth orbit, at this point in time, it is only coordination of frequencies to ensure that there is no harmful interference in the use as between. So this is where we are. And I must make a point before I move on. There is a general perception, at least that's what I have sensed, that somehow the private sector, the commercial and good for nothing chap, they will take over space. No, that is not true. The Outer Space Treaty, the Russians did not want commercial activity. They wanted only military activity. The United States already had a Comcast, which is the biggest telecommunication, satellite communication. 17 European countries were already part of all that. They wanted commercial activity. So Article 6 of Outer Space Treaty makes the state party responsible for due authorization and continuing monitoring of their non-government entities. So, of course, we have heard that the Vice President of the United States, post Elon Musk having withdrawn his back to position sort of thing, said that America will not do. Have we heard anything about what the US licensor, which is US FAA, did he take action against Mr. Musk? Did he say, I will not give you any further licenses for your 42,000. I mean, as many as you got up, great. Was there a penalty imposed? We don't know about that. Maybe it happened. So now I want to talk to you about near Earth. Near Earth is identified, it is not in conflict with the international boundary, notional boundary between airspace and outer space. That remains the accepted norm. It is a carbon line, as you know, but it is also subsequently validated by the International Air Sports Federation, which keeps world records. So this appears to be a world record which is consistent with the Cambridge line. But the space between the highest civil aviation traffic, which seems to be around 18 kilometers or maybe 19, and well, if you talk of military, I don't know how high our military aircraft fly, but generally I would say 21 kilometers or 22 max, unless you're talking of SR-17, which America is flying at 27 kilometers, 90,000 feet. This is an area about which our airspace may not be under surveillance, or may not be, are we capable of defending it up to 100? And we do know that beyond that, you have a 50 kilometers, which is the buoyancy, where the balloons are. Indeed, the United States accepts that 50 as beyond 50 as being outer space, and their aviators who cross that threshold are given the pips of astronaut. But that's for America. Now, beyond the 100, the 120, and we've heard some discussions on the fragmentation and so on and so forth, that is the point of threshold, the re-entry threshold for space systems. And this fragmentation and explosion will happen, but particularly if it is uncontrolled entry. And we know that it is at 160 kilometers, which is the lowest practical operating orbit for satellites. So this entire area, space, which traverses our sovereign airspace and then outer space, is between, let's say, 21 or 22 kilometers up to 100 and then beyond. And that is not, there is not a great deal of surveillance in general. I'm sure the Chinese do it. I'm sure the Americans do it. I don't know about other countries. I was, in fact, talking, General Bhatt, I was talking to Digantara, since I advised them. And I said, well, what about this? Are you doing this? Are you not doing this? No, ma'am, we're not doing it. Well, do you have the plan to do it? There hasn't been a need as yet for it, but we will develop that if it's required. So now this is where we are. This is near space, therefore. So now what do we have? Like I said, it's the ITU that governs how spectrum will be used. ITU holds every 3 to 4 years what they call the World Radio Telecommunications Conferences. And this factors in all the new technological advances on the use of frequency so that it's better, it's more efficient, more systems can be put in place, so forth. The last, which announced the final outcomes, was in December of 2019. This is the 5G communications revolution. And this has allowed all of these things that were being spoken about, high altitude drones, pseudo satellites, balloons, high altitude pseudo satellites, all these to be now used within airspace. So when I'm thinking of India and India's airspace, one half is girdled by countries admittedly inimical. The other half is girdled by where our sphere of influence, I don't know to what extent it sort of wavers between this and that, but can we depend in the case of war? I don't know. That's your call to take. You'd know better. So when I'm thinking of that, and I'm thinking that, well, how is it going to work for us? Now, when you talk of aerospace, I think this was a question asked about, will we have aerospace vehicles? Perhaps that was a question that was asked. This is what Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos did. It was so, then up, and came down like an aircraft. So what it is a trans-atmospheric rocket. Point to point, but it goes up in airspace, then goes up and comes down like an aeroplane. But remember that a suborbital flight is a flight that achieves space altitude, that means over 100, without sufficient speed to orbit around the Earth. That is why it's suborbital. So technological capabilities. But beyond all this stuff is this latest thing. The US Air Force has asked for a commercial rocket cargo ship. And it is, in short, exploring the uses of commercial suborbital vehicles for transporting heavy cargo over very long distances of the Earth. Now, this, of course, is civil use. But, as we all well know, it's capable of any kind of use other than civil, I think. Now, if this becomes, not that this, but when this is deployed, it is going to have serious implications on the international treaties, not just outer space, but you know that the Chicago Convention 44 governs international civil aviation. And I hope that CAPS will take the initiative on this. And I say that to you, sir, for the reason that some years ago, I mean, I am invited to the Gujarat National Law University to speak on international air law, space law, whatever they want. And I landed up in Gandhinagar and I discovered the commandant of the Western Air Command and his officers all seated there. And I was absolutely thrilled to bits to see that, because we need the theoretical knowledge and the deep expertise to make our own understanding of what is our narrative. You can follow the leader, I mean, whoever it is, but do we have our own, precise, इंडिया के लिए ये सबसे बढ़िया है, हो ना हो वो अलग बात है, but at least we know what our threshold is. And recently, some weeks ago, some months ago, I was speaking to your JAG officers from across the country, and they wanted me to speak on international air law because it has many articles that are specific to military use. And I'm really pleased about it, so I'm taking the liberty to make a suggestion to you. So now this is what it is. It is going to have a serious implication on the Chicago Convention. First and foremost, how do you define this vehicle? This thing that goes atmosphere and outer space and in and out and whatever it is. So how is this American vehicle? It will go through friendly countries' airspace, inimical country in outer space, come right back in. So upgrade GNSS, yes, but important control over national airspace. That is the real thing. And then we have spoken a lot about the rendezvous and proximity. This is, of course, completely a in-space situation. Well, that has been said, you make a visual eye contact. You may conduct operations by going very close to the target or by actually making physical contact. So if it's a case of peaceful use, you may use robotic operations for capturing debris. That's easier said than done, because debris, the ownership, the jurisdiction and control of that debris, which is, of course, if it is man-made debris, remains with the owner and the launching state. So I capture debris, hoping that there will be some technology platform as part of my capture. It's not like maritime. It is not an abandoned vessel. That does not shift in outer space. So there is huge regulatory issues there. Then there is docking. Now you might be wanting to conduct on-orbit servicing, maintenance, repairs, refueling, retrofitting. But what about refurbishment of parts? We do that with aircrafts, I'm told. You take out a good part from here and put it into one that you need if this is not. But whose inoperative satellite are you going to be using? And what part of it? That is another issue. There could be unintentional collision because, the technology is still new, and while you're trying to dock, it might quite happen that you don't mean. But in that unintentional, it's possible that this space object is thrown into another orbit which is dangerous or hazardous. Then what happens? Who will be liable and responsible? The liability and the responsibility, Group Captain Kushwaha was talking about it in context to national law. In Outer Space Treaty, it rests with the state party. And since the ownership, jurisdiction, control doesn't shift, it rests with the party, space party. And without physical contact, you might want to image it, you might do close range characterization, you might do close range inspection. But military purpose, intentional collision, ASAT operation, I think the Russians carried out something like this. Without physical contact, disable the satellite, place it in a dangerous or hazardous orbit, or offensive countermeasures. Jam it, destroy it, capture it, illuminate it, all of that. That is being perfected. It'll happen sooner than later. There is much that has been said about SSA and the number of collision avoidance maneuvers that have been taken, and the fact that there isn't international regulation on the subject, and I'll agree with you that there isn't. But there are enough international treaties which are not being complied by state parties, which do not, quite obviously, under the registration convention. And you know that the registration convention, the search and rescue, the liability convention, and the Moon Agreement all amplify various articles of Outer Space Treaty. And so the point is that, again, I was talking to Digantara, our own startup. The fact is that these false positives, which is that there's an information you get that, you know, this is likely to happen, the collision is likely to happen, and even if you don't want to, willy-nilly, you will move your satellite out of harm's way. Now, the point of the matter is, in order to improve the efficiency of SSA or STM, day-to-day STM operations, you need proper identification of that object. That can happen if everybody is registering their object. If not, there's a fallback arrangement. It is called COSPAR. It is the Committee on Space Research. It's a US NASA funded. They allot identifying numbers. But the other is ITU. You can identify by the frequency it emits. There is no coordination. No country has asked for a coordination as yet between the Office on Outer Space Affairs, USA, and ITU. So that this number that is given by ITU to, let's say, our satellite, which is communicated only to our country, is also populated. And there is exchange of information. So for people providing SSA, they're able to get accurate information backed with good data. So that is the way it is, and I will now finish. So of course, there's regulation, so forth. What you do need to look out for is Ukraine, as we have spoken endlessly. I won't say anything more except what I have said. What was the role of the licensor? And secondly, Artemis, please take the trouble to read it very, very carefully to understand its full dimensions. It is surprising, you will know that between 5 countries that had ratified today, there are 18 countries, most of which have now signed Artemis. There would have to be a very good reason for it. I'll leave these thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you,